Leisa Peterson. Welcome to the More Than Your Age podcast.
I'm so happy to be here. Thank you.
Thank you for joining me. Leisa, you are the author of The Mindful Millionaire. You host your own podcast as well, Mindful Millionaire. You are a financial advisor. You serve as a coach, retreat leader, and workshop educator about financial freedom. Leisa, when I'm trying to remember how we got connected. I know you filled out a form, and so I was going through all of them, and I was just reading the basic synopsis before I even looked you up. And so I was reading the information. I was like, oh, this is an interesting story. And then reached out, and then I looked more into you, and I was like, oh, she's like really legit. Like she is very accomplished. And so, but I want to go back to kind of what attracted me initially to your story before I learned more about you was just the significant incident that happened in your life to lead to chasing this life of wealth that you earned very quickly. So you were not always a wealthy person. You did not grow up with a lot of money. What was your relationship with money like as a child? And then what did it look like for your family?
I came from a home where money was really very stressful. My mom had barely finished high school. My dad had been in jail, I think, right after high school, right before I was born. They did not have good foundational understanding of money. And it was just around the time when credit was becoming more and more available in the late 60s when I was born. And my parents both really got into that. It wasn't that they weren't making enough for us to, have food on the table, but they got in over their head with debt and they couldn't stay on top of it. And so we would have cars repossessed. We had to sell a home and move down the street and rent a house, which I remember feeling a lot of shame around that from an early age. We had broken down cars in our front yard that we didn't have money to fix. And it was a nice enough lower middle class neighborhood, but I remember the stigma of feeling like we were the poorest people and on the street and that people looked down to us and weren't friendly to us because of that. So that was my earliest memory. It's just a lot of stress, a lot of fighting, a lot of challenges with money that started me out. And it was a funny story I think I share in the book, but when I was 8 years old, I was at somebody's house and they're like, oh, do you want to help me roll money? And they were showing me like the dimes, we put them and then they add up to this much and the nickels add up to this much and the rolls. And I was like, I thought I had died and gone to heaven. It was like all I want to do for the rest of my life. No wonder I turned into a banker. I just want to touch money and play with money all day long. Like I just became obsessed. And so I started a business really quickly after that because I was like, I'll pull your weeds, I'll mow your lawn, I'll wash your windows, like anything to get money. So.
Well, you said too at your home or, where you lived growing up, like there were repossessed cars and you definitely knew that you were the poorest kids in the neighborhood or at the school. Would you invite people over, or because there was that shame, did you just kind of stay away from that and rather go to other people's homes?
I think that people came, but honestly, our family was different. Like the other thing is my mom cut hair and my parents were hippies and it was a more conservative, neighborhood. So we also stuck out for that reason. And I remember looking back and there were kids that would say I can't play with you. So I didn't actually have a lot of friends. And so I was more focused on how can I have friends, not as much on the money piece of it. It was just something that I think when you're struggling already, you try to make up stories as a kid of this is why they don't like me, because we don't have the right car or we have these problems with money. I think I was just grasping to give story to why did I not fit in? And it wouldn't be till later that it was well, your parents were hippies and that wasn't really a good thing at that time. They looked dangerous. And so, but I would connect it to money, whereas it probably was more socially oriented.
So would you hear often at times where kids would say, oh, I'm not allowed to play with you? Or was that maybe just once or twice?
I don't think it takes too many times to change I think it happened a couple times. Or, I'd always be the one who's oh, we could go to my house and then nobody would want to come, or And it wasn't always that way. It was just enough. Like I'd have a friend one day and then they'd be gone. Like there was just a lot of difficulty of holding on to friendships and feeling like I belonged from an early age. And, that was something that it's funny because now, fast forward, all these years later, I'm known for community and I'm known for being just a really good friend and supportive person. And I can't help but think that the way that I was treated early in life, kind of forced me to really focus and be very outwardly focused on how are you feeling? What do you need as a human? And even as a coach, it's like I'm really good at seeing what's going on for people. Yeah. And you just wonder if all of that got started really early in life.
Well, probably so. I mean, because you even talk about in your book how much your view on money is affected by how you were raised and what you saw and your perception of it and whether you did or did not have it. And it can affect two people under the same household in a completely different way. So it has to correlate as well with just socially and how you are with other people too. Yeah. I would imagine so completely. Well, okay. So in your book, you say, your dreams were filled with a life that your parents couldn't provide, but one that you wanted. So this money, you knew you always wanted to make money. You even said like you were rolling money and because you're like, oh, buddy, I want to get my hands on it. So because you didn't have that as an example growing up, how did you know where to go and what to do and how to make your financial dreams a reality at a really young age?
Yeah. Well, I think it's interesting because I didn't know, but my parents both have an entrepreneurial spirit. They started businesses and they closed businesses, but they were always hustling. And so I learned that early on that you could make money, that you could start a business and you could make money. You might not make a lot of it, but you could make money. And interesting enough, I was the first person to go to college. And when I went to college, I was very creative at that time, thinking I wanted to go into the fashion business. And I ended up graduating and getting my first job working for a very prestigious designer in San Francisco, Jessica McClintock, as a design assistant right out of college. And I was so excited. It was such a glamorous, exciting, creative job, but it paid almost nothing. And by the end of my first year of working with her, I realized that I was going to actually struggle more with money than my parents had struggled. And that was like unacceptable to me at that point. So it was a wake up call of, I want to follow my passion. Wait a minute, this isn't working out. I went back to school to get my MBA in finance, and I didn't know anyone in finance. Like I didn't know bankers. I didn't know what world was not part of my world. I was just like, well, I'm going to follow the money and hopefully this helps. And one other thing is in college, I met a really good friend, and her father was building a very successful company, and she had access to a lot of money, and she would travel, and after we finished school, she would take me to travel around the world with her, and I got to see what it was like to live this other lifestyle that I had never been exposed to. It was amazing. And that experience, I think, taught me that I wanted it. Like, it wasn't like he was a mentor to me, but I could ask questions. I was like, if he can do this, and he didn't come from very much money, I can figure this out too.
So then, you see that and you decide, okay, I'm going to figure this out. How, from that moment to when you did get the first job in finance, or how you say finance, I like that. So when you had that first job to where you really did start making money, like how did that all get into play where you really said, yes, I can do this. This is going to happen?
A couple things. I got out my MBA. I went to work in insurance. I did that for a few years and realized that I wasn't going to become wealthy doing that. And then I changed to another company. And one day, a big bank that I would eventually go to work for called to try and recruit somebody on my team to move and take this big job at this bank. And she's like, I don't want to do that. But she gave me the information to this headhunter at Wells Fargo at the time. And long story short, that opportunity led to like just one of the biggest work opportunities. Like it was just there's like times in our lives where we know that this thing that's coming, and, once I got the job offer and they offered to help us buy a new home, and I mean, they just started rolling out the red carpet. I was like, my life is never going to be the same. Like, I'm going to seize this opportunity and make the most of it. And simultaneous to that, my husband and I, he's a general contractor. I was like, we're going to buy a house in the Bay Area and we're going to use all this money that they're making available to us to like buy this house. And that was when my brain really started kicking in that like, I'm really good with money and I'm really good with like, I don't have to have a lot to work with, but if I have some opportunity, I will make millions out of it. And sure enough, like we bought a house that was not even like normal people couldn't live there, but we did because it was in such bad shape. We renovated it. I think we bought it for like $225,000 at a really pivotal time in Walnut Creek. And 2 years later, we doubled it. So we sold it for like $500,000. And we had already started building another house at the time where my husband left me and my daughter and went up to Tahoe. And we would build this house for, I don't know, let's say $300,000 and sell it for like $700,000 a few years later. Like I started figuring out that I was, because of all the training with money, because of the fact that I was ambitious, I could figure out how to work with tax policy, but we'd live in the home for a few years, then we'd be able to sell it and we wouldn't have to pay income tax because of the tax policy. If you live in the home as a primary home for 2 years, you could make up to $500,000. And we just started repeating this over and over again while I was making really good money as a banker. And I would continue to do that for many years, even though I left my job in one role at Wells. I went to a sales role and I started making even more money. Like just when you're oriented to making money, what I have seen, and I'm watching this in my daughter, like you can move mountains. But if you don't understand how the game works and you don't understand how to constantly be thinking that way, it's a lot harder to do. Is that helpful? I'm close to this, so yeah.
Yeah, no, it's very helpful. Well, so, when you're in this process of we do houses as well. And so I understand that mindset too of staying in it for a few years, selling it or flipping, whatever, because that's a good side thing, type of thing to do. And when you're in the middle of doing that, and then you're making a lot of money at your current job or, the job that you were at the time, did you feel fully, like in these moments, did you feel fully satisfied with the amount of wealth that you accumulated? Or did you always want more?
I think that, keep in mind, we were doing this between 1998 and a lot of this between then and 2008. It was incredibly volatile. Like it was going up, but there was a lot of risk involved, especially when you got into 2006 and then, this huge crash. So I think that there may have been times where it's like more. But first of all, my husband's more conservative than I am. And I also am risk adverse. So between the two of us, it's like, I might want more, but between us having to figure out like, what was he comfortable with taking on, it put kind of a ceiling on what was possible. And I felt like that in the end was really helpful because we didn't get too overextended and we were able to shift things and not lose everything, because it would have been really easy for us to have lost everything. And if we had been more ambitious, we probably would.
Good. Well, in your book, you shared about a moment regarding your dad and how you felt a responsibility in some sense for his murder, which this will tie into everything with money. What happened to him, and what was it about that situation that caused you to feel responsible and then play into where you were financially and everything?
Yeah. So when I was growing up, like I mentioned, there was a lot of trauma and my parents really had not come. They'd come from very broken homes. They did their best to make us feel loved, but it was a very traumatic situation growing up. And fast forward, my parents got divorced when I was in my first year of college, and my father kind of went off the deep end and started just being a pretty difficult person to be around. And ultimately, I kicked him out of my life, and everybody else in the family kind of followed suit because he just wasn't a healthy person to be around. And so 10 years later, when he was murdered, there was a lot of guilt because I felt like if I hadn't kicked him out of my life, like maybe I still would have been there and been able to help him. And now, all these years later, I don't feel like I probably could have made a difference. But back then I was like, oh my gosh, I'm a very strong person. If I had been in his life, he had tried to get in touch with me. I had started to write letters to him when he was killed. Like one of my letters was on his desk and my brother found it. And, it looked like he'd been crying a lot because there were like water spots all over the letter. And it broke me open. But even probably more related to my life is when his death occurred, I was working on a really big deal, a co-branded marketing deal at Wells Fargo that I was in charge of. And I got the news and I kind of split into two people. Like one kept the outer look of like, everything's fine and I'm going to do my job. And then the other part of me just completely collapsed and there was like nothing there. And I realized this existential crisis that I had was like, I actually don't know what it means to be happy. I know how to make money. I know how to, raise a kid, barely, be a wife, barely. Like I was not doing a good job in any of those places. I was good at money, making money, and everything else was like secondary. And I didn't know it at the time. I just knew that I did not have the right recipe for life. And I was heading down a really dark path because I wasn't probably going to stay married. I probably wasn't going to be a great mom. And so when he died, I ended up, that part of me that was falling apart decided to go down and do some deep dive spiritual exploration of like, well, if I'm not money and that's not, my value isn't all based on money and success, then like, who am I? And that began this, thing 26 years ago.
Yeah, one, I just want to acknowledge, I don't know what you experienced, just with childhood and the trauma, and then like the mix of emotions with losing your dad. And so I know it was a while ago, but still, I'm still sorry for your loss. And I know that time for you, just based on what you shared and what I read, like you said too, was just eye-opening and trying to figure out what is true happiness. Is money, am I really happy? Am I doing whatever I'm supposed to be doing? And so now you're going down this path of like trying to figure out who you are and what life looks like. And then flash forward, I don't know the time difference, so I'd love to hear on that too. Money was everything for you. It was really important. You were really good at making money. Then your father passed away. And then you thought about it all the time. You finally had this realization that money could no longer dictate your life after this incident at your doctor's office. This dark-haired man walked into the waiting room and he said something to everyone. What did he say?
Yeah, he looked at me and as he was pulling out a very large gun, said, "You might want to leave now." And I thought he was a police officer. Like I did not equate, even back, this is 2013. So my dad was killed in 1999. So 14 years later, granted, shootings happened, but at that time, you're not like, thinking this is happening, but it was. He had been a patient at the office. He was coming with a vendetta to hurt his doctor. He ended up going on a shooting rampage. He found his doctor, shot her. She did not die, but she lost her ability to be a doctor. My doctor tried to talk him down. He shot at him, hit someone else, then shot and killed my doctor, and eventually killed himself. And I did not see it, but it was the third floor of a building, and it was just chaos trying to get out of the building. And, we knew what was going on. And honestly, I've always been very just understanding things in a way that don't make sense. But immediately I was like, I knew my doctor. I knew that he would do anything he needed to do. And I didn't end up leaving. I ended up staying and going to the police station later when I didn't need to. But I just wanted to see him. I wanted to prove that I was wrong. I couldn't stand the thought of waiting. And once I saw his nurse I knew that he had been killed. It was horrible. But I had an existential experience in the doctor's office, and I talk about it in the book, where I was like, I've done all this work on myself inside. I've spent the past 14 years like trying to understand the meaning of life and having this vibrant meditation practice. And I've been teaching meditation and mindfulness for like 10 years at that point. I was like, this is not a coincidence that I'm here. Like, I'm taking this as a sign that I have a much bigger purpose in life than just being at that time a financial advisor. Like, I'm supposed to share these things that I've learned over this past 14 years with other people. I don't know what that looks like. I'm not sure that I could actually make money with it, but I have to leave this job and start something else and see where it goes. And it took me about 3 or 4 months to do that.
Oh, wow. So it didn't take you that long, really.
The day that it happened, it was interesting. All morning for the first time, now I'm on camera all the time. I have a YouTube channel. I've been making videos now for 11 years. But in 2013, I was trying to get a speaking opportunity at a conference, and they needed a 1-minute video. And I'd never done it before. And so all morning before I left to my doctor's office, I had been filming, trying to figure out how to film myself, whatever we used back then, like a camera. I mean, it was terrible. I still have it. Just look at it. But it was me thinking there's got to be more, like there's something more here for me. So that seed was planted, but never would I have thought that I was going to walk away from all of it.
Yeah. Wow. So I didn't even realize that much time had passed from the passing of your father and the doctor incident. And so when we had talked about with your father of just trying to have this sense of happiness and fulfillment, and you knew how to make money, and then this happened, there was a lot of work that was done in between that time. And you kind of shared a little bit. I'm just curious to know with both of those, how did it, this is kind of a broad question, so just pick what you want with it. Just how did some of those, with that situation, how did that really change your life, your outlook, and to make that step after 3 or 4 months of, I got to get out of this?
Mm-hmm. You're talking about the shooting in the doctor's office. How did it change my perspective, or just that journey of that 14 years?
Kind of both, because I didn't realize that much time had passed, and so I know that's a lot. So really, honestly, just take it from whichever aspect.
A couple of things coming up. So unfortunately, after my dad died, both my parents were really young. Like, I think my mom was 19 when I was born, and my dad was maybe 22. My mom, in 2004, as I was pregnant with my son, my mom was diagnosed with stage 4 ovarian cancer. And so I am, and she was 56 at the time, so younger than I am now. And that began this 3.5-year process before she died of it. But all the while, I was on this very, I'm a type A person. If I go down the rabbit hole with spirituality, and at that time it was Buddhism, and I was teaching around the world. I was a teacher for an organization, teaching Buddhism and teaching meditation. And I was doing all of that even while I had my full-time job as a banker. But when my mom got sick, I, started taking these practices that I was learning about Buddhism and sharing things with her and helping her and doing whatever I could to help her through that battle, really is what it was. And it changed me, because one of the things in Buddhism, I think she was 1 year into this battle with cancer. My son was 1 year old. I decided to do this counting retreat, which is very popular in Buddhism. So you've seen the mala beads probably before, where you have one bead and another bead. And so the way that these counting retreats would work is normally you would go somewhere and kind of, be like a monk or a nun and count these mantras for a month or something. But I couldn't do that. But I really wanted to do, and this cleansing that occurs from these intense retreats, and you're counting 150,000 of a very long mantra over and over and over again for 10 hours a day. Because I couldn't leave my family and I couldn't leave my mom, I did it in the closet for 3 months. I would work and I would make dinner, and then I'd go back into the closet and 10 hours a day. Like somehow I figured out how to do this. And in the course of being in the closet for 3 months of counting his mantras, which just, I mean, I just bless that young lady. Like, I don't know how she did it, but she did it. And in that closet, everything changed. Like, I started doing forgiveness practice around my dad and the stuff that had happened, and for my mom and for my brother and for everyone who had ever harmed me in any way. And it just started coming out like, what is it? Stains coming out of, laundry. Like everything just started clearing out of me to the point where there was nothing but love at the end of this retreat. And funny too, I was thinking it was going to be 3 months, but then there were commitments that until you did this closing ceremony, which couldn't happen for another 3 months, you had to do all these things. So what was started as 1 month became like 6 months of this deep spiritual practice that I don't know how I did it, but I needed to do it. And when I came out of that, I was a better kid for my mom. I was a better, parent for my kids. Like I was just totally changed. And that would continue in different ways until today. I mean, I continue to have these experiences and I take people through these experiences that thankfully aren't as painful as what I went through in the closet. But I am constantly shedding whatever is not helpful to me. I feel like that's just the way that I live now. And so, long answer to your question, when the shooting happened, back to that moment, I think it was like, girlfriend, for the past, 14 years, you have been excavating your soul. How many people do this? At that time, not very many. More people have done it, in this past 10 years than before that. And it was like, you've got to go show people what this looks like when you've gone through that kind of radical change, like, financially, relationally, with a career, like every aspect of my life, I felt like people needed to see because the life I'm living wasn't normal. And it was pretty freaking amazing. And
wow. Yeah. And that's a lot of work, 14 years. And, just it's progressive. And I'm sure you learned so much. And then the shooting happens. And now you're saying, okay, I need to walk with people and help them to go through different things. And you tie in money and wealth with it. And then you eventually write your book. And I'm just curious to know too, when you decided to leave, like after 3 to 4 months, did you know exactly the next step, or was it more, I'm going to just kind of wait, I'm going to leave my job and now I'm going to wait and just kind of see what happens?
Because I had been teaching meditation, I was very comfortable leading groups and helping people in spiritual transformation, but I hadn't asked people to pay me money for it. So what I did was I gave notice on the 14th of April. And then as soon as I had given notice, I remember packing up all my stuff in my office and then going home. And I had an email that I sent. And I think I had 200 or 300 people on this list that I had accumulated for different reasons. And they were friends, right? That was it. Or people who had come to my meditation classes. And I just sent it out and I said, I'm starting this class next week. It's all by phone because we didn't have Zoom at that time. So funny, like the pre-Zoom world. Like, I'm going to do this class and you just call in and I'm going to do it for 5 weeks. It's like $37 and, it's called Living a Wealthy Life. Like, it cracks me up because I didn't know what I was doing. And I got so much feedback at the end that was like, wow, I have a long way to go. Like, but that was the beginning. I was off and running.
Well, and I know, so you said $37?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so I think that's interesting too, that you decided to charge instead of doing it for free because you're a finance woman. So, how did you come up with the $37?
I don't know. It's pretty funny. I think it was I knew that it was going to be worth a lot more than that, but I wanted people to pay something. I think in my mind, it was the leap probably because I had done all this spiritual counseling for free for all those years. And I needed to make sure that people knew that this wasn't that this was a business, that this was a legitimate business. Yeah, I still do things for free. It's not like I have bias, but for me in that moment, that's what I needed.
But then also people equate, like if they're paying for something, they equate more value to it too. Anyway, I'm sure you know that as well. Well, okay. So then we flash forward, you started your business, your other business, and then you wrote your book. I want to share a few things too for the listeners. So you made some changes in your life and realized the power that money can have or not have on someone's life. So some moments from the book. In a section, you wrote how money talk isn't customary due to the flood of emotions regarding money and our background with it, whether that's shame, guilt, greed, regret. The other day, I was having a conversation with some people too, and my husband is he's an entrepreneur. He's very open about, let's talk finance, let's talk finances. And then other people are like, oh, that's hush hush. We don't talk about it. And so in your opinion, how beneficial is it for people to share openly about money, and why?
I think everybody would be a lot healthier if they talked about money and there wasn't so much secrecy in our financial lives. There's been some studies where people are more comfortable, right, talking about sex than they are money, which is hilarious. But the idea of like how much you make or negotiating a raise or how much you pay for your mortgage or how much, credit card debt. I had the good fortune right at the time that I was leaving my job. Somehow I've heard about this organization called FinCon, Financial Bloggers Organization, that had started maybe in 2010. And so it was 4 years old, and they were meeting in New Orleans that year and in the fall. So I had some time to kind of start to learn what this was like. But that was a turning point for me, because in the FinCon world, everybody talked about money, and a lot of people were sharing like how much money they were making from their business, how much credit card debt they had paid off. Like it was a badge of honor to share very personal data to millions of people, which was just mind-boggling. Like that was a leap that I wasn't ready to take at that time. But it made me realize that you can be safe sharing this information and that it's helpful, and people are willing to pay for it when you're willing to be candid and vulnerable about your situation. So changed my mindset about it early on. But in all the work that I've done, I would say it depends on how much trauma you've had around money to whether or not this is going to be healthy for you. Because for some people, if they've had a lot of trauma about money, they might come to me as a coach and talk to me about money, but they probably aren't going to want to tell other people, especially family members or friends, about those same things. And it would be very uncomfortable and probably not a good thing. So I just say to everyone, know your limits, push them. At the very least, do not pass your hangups about talking about money onto your children. Like we've been open with our children from as early in life as possible. Our children understand money. We talk about it. We talk about how much money we have or things cost or what choices we're making and why we're making those choices. Like that's huge. And my children are so adult. My son's 20, my daughter's 27. They are so responsible with money. And I can't help but think that it's because we just treated them like somebody who was smart enough and capable enough to understand what we were sharing with them. It's just a thing. It's just a tool. It's not some big emotional baggage thing. And if you hide it from people, that's when the baggage comes, by not sharing and treating it like secret.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really good. As I was reading, I'm a teacher as a previous profession and background, and thinking of the way, and I don't know if you work with many teachers, but there's a certain mindset that it's just we don't make money. There's definitely a glass ceiling. And so there's can be a lot of negativity with that, and that their worth or less worth. I asked a bunch of people questions about it, and just because it just kept getting me thinking about money and the thought of it. And it was just interesting. Like, I just really felt like reading your book kind of was getting me to think more about my own personal thoughts with it, and then other people that have a similar background as well. So it was pretty fascinating. So I just wanted to say thank you for that. I just really appreciate that a lot. Something else you wrote, you said, when money gets misidentified as being something that determines, I really liked this part, When money gets misidentified as being something that determines how powerful a person you are, it's easy to see how things take a turn for the worse. When this belief gets perpetuated, you end up having a society in which it is believed that those with money have power over others and those who don't are powerless. This is 100% accurate. When society functions under the belief that those with money have power and those without don't, how do you operate in a society? Because there are people, when you have people who have that mindset, no, you have money, you have power, and those who don't. I mean, exactly what you said. How do you operate when that doesn't align with the mindset of many people?
Yeah. Well, we're experiencing it right now, not to get political, but like we live in a society that says that billionaires are smarter than everybody else. And I would say that's not true. I would say that billionaires are plagued by deep set scarcity, at least the majority of the billionaires that we know of on the planet. And the reason I say that is the idea, well, let's just go to rats. Like if you've ever come across a rat's nest where they can't stop, they'll just keep finding the thing and putting it in their house, collecting as much as possible, right? There's no limit. They have no limit to like, at what point do you say I have enough and everything else that I make is going to go make the world a better place or go do something with it, like some kind of legacy. Like if it's only through the mind of scarcity that would cause someone to want to have enough money that 1,000 lives, 25,000 lives couldn't spend that money in their lifetime. That is a defect in the brain. There's no reason for that. Do you follow me? Like it's only through scarcity that somebody would be motivated to be that or have that. It's frightening because we're actually saying that the people that have some of the biggest problems because they can't say when are smarter than everybody else. So the people who say, like, I proudly tell people I have enough. Doesn't mean we're not going to make more money if it comes, but like I am no longer motivated through money because I have enough to take care of myself. I can help my children. We have enough. And I want people to hear me say that because it's coming from a place of deep sincerity in a world that nobody wants to say that. In fact, when I used to say that when I had my company and it was bigger, my employees got upset because they would say, you shouldn't say that to anybody because nobody's going to want to work with us. Nobody's going to want to give us money. And I'm like, you know what? If that's the cost of me saying that, I'm willing to stand on that one because I feel like it's so important for people to hear someone say, I have enough. And everybody's enoughness number might be different. I'm sure that can happen, but because of all this spiritual work I've done, my enoughness number is probably a lot lower than other people would think is appropriate for me to even say that.
Well, and you talk too a lot about like this whole enoughness of like this millionaire mindset is not just a dollar amount. Like it's your prosperity. You have this list. I have your book. I didn't write it down on here, but I have this. Show everybody. Here's her book. So you have it's on page 77. I wanted to look at it. This list of all these definitions of what prosperity can look like. One is prosperity is not synonymous with having lots of money. Prosperity is closely aligned with gratefulness. Prosperity is about the inner rewards far more than the external ones. Like, yes, we do need money to live, but there's so much more with prosperity. It all comes down to what you are here to do and what tools you need to accomplish your goals. I loved it. I had that part I underlined. I was like, yes, Leisa. Got it. It was so good. I mean, your book does such a great job to the reader to determine and evaluate how money has affected them and how our history or certain events really plays into what money does to us in our lives. I already talked more. It's just made me want to do a deeper dive too into why I view money the way that I view. I would love for you to just share a little bit more about the book and your coaching and just kind of what that's all morphs. You shared some too, but share more with that.
Well, I'd say maybe starting with mindset because we're talking about it, but sometimes it gets thrown around a lot and people don't necessarily know the definition or at least my definition. First of all, there's this concept of toxic positivity, whether you think it's toxic or not. There's a lot of data that says we have to be really careful about just like putting a positive spin on everything. The mindset work I teach is not about that. The mindset work I teach is about the fact that mindset is very emotional. And I'm using the word mind, but it's actually very emotional. And we can think of like even something as simple as like, is there something with money that you don't like to do? Everybody can just think in that moment, like that you don't like to do. There's a really good chance that has nothing to do with the money and everything to do with the emotion behind it. Which means that my job as a coach or my job as an author is to expose people to the emotion underlying their experiences with money. And, because money is so important in this society we live in, it actually crosses over into our relationships and the health of our body. Of course, if you're following all this stuff with healthcare, for example, money and healthcare are deeply intertwined. Money and the food supply that we have in our society, deeply intertwined. So what I try to do with folks is help them see things that are so close, just if we put our hand right up to our face and we can't see the lines on our hand. I try to help people see things that are so close to their own identity that they can't see on their own. They need some help. So maybe it's through inquiry. There's a lot of questions in the book. When I work with people, it's a lot of questions about, what are your first memories of money? What was happening in your home growing up with money? What does your mom believe about money? What does your dad believe about money? Like those things help us to uncover, what's going on inside of us. And I found it to be very profound because many times people if they've not focused on this particular aspect of their mindset, they haven't asked themselves those questions. When people come to retreats or people come to work with me, I'm trying to understand at the deepest level of this human, where is the scarcity coming from? Where are the scarcity patterns coming from? And I've worked with people who have, a negative net worth all the way to people that have, I don't know if I've worked with a billionaire, but hundreds of millions of dollars. Everyone's got this, like we're not immune to it. So that's a little bit, I like to travel and I like to host people in beautiful places because I found that when we're in places that really light us up, like Hawaii or Sedona, or maybe my new book it starts out in Paris and it's a parable. And I'm like, ooh, does that mean I get to host some retreats in Paris? Like, okay. Yes. I'm ready for that. But when people go to places that are filled with lots of inspiration and awe and beauty, we tend to let our defenses down and we become open to, new possibilities. So my job is to help people see those emotional threads. I help them actually move beyond them, clear it out so it's no longer a factor that affects their decisions. And then because of my background in building wealth and being a financial advisor and a certified financial planner, then it's like, okay, what are we going to do practically? What can you do that's going to turn your life in the direction that you want financially, but having it align with your values rather than just being all about the money?
Yeah, that's great. And I love too how you just mentioned that, you've worked with people that are in the negative and people with $100 million, and that can be a lot of the same things, whether you have a lot or a little, and just finding out how do you line that and then make that work with what you need to ultimately live a fulfilled life. You don't need to have the millions and millions, or you can.
I'm glad you said that because I do want to point out, this is such a great reflection. The reason anyone listening to this of what you just said is so important is that there's no reason to feel any kind of shame around money at all, period. And what do I mean by that? I don't care what's happened in the past. I don't care where you are today and, what mistakes you think you've made or what regrets you have. Everyone has them. You are not alone. And it can make it a lot easier to buy the book or to, listen to some of my stuff when you're thinking to yourself, okay, there are people that have a lot more than I do who are doing and needing to do or have done this exact excavation to help themselves feel better about life and live a more beautiful, prosperous, abundant life just by doing these things. Like no shame whatsoever. There's no space for it, because if it's there, it can prevent us from actually doing the things that will make us feel better.
Yeah. And it's so easy to compare and look and see, especially if you don't have as much money as you would like, or as you think that everybody else has, to just say, oh, they've got it together. I can't do that because I don't have what I think I would want. And it kind of ties in a way to the theme of the show. You know, the show is about being more than your age or being more than your life circumstance. And so part of your story that was really interesting to me was one, that you became really wealthy at a young age. So there's your age factor. And then also you had these two major life events that happened. I know there are other things, but the murder of your father, and then also the gunman who came into your doctor's office, and how those two situations drastically changed your life and the processes and the things that you do. And it can be, excuse me, it can be really easy to take that and then just, we need to grieve. I always want to mention that, like when we have hard things, we need to grieve and go through that. Absolutely. And then in addition to that, then we need to, we either stay in it or we do something. And so you did that something. My final question, which is the question I ask everybody. So if you could encourage one woman who feels blocked or limited to pursue a dream or a goal based on her age or a life circumstance like what you endured, what would you say to her to encourage her?
Building off of what we already said, like, please do not give yourself a hard time about where you've been or what choices you've made. Like, your ability to celebrate who you are, how far you've come, all the things that you've done that have been amazing is way more important than the dwelling on what hasn't worked. Unfortunately, our brains are wired to focus on the things often that haven't worked and repeat those over and over and over again. And yet, when we feel good about ourselves, when we have found a way to become our own best cheerleader or our own best friend, we are going to be far more capable of making big, significant, meaningful changes in our lives. And so who do you surround yourself by? Like, if there is even one person who's really negative, who gives you a hard time, outside of your own inner voice, like, don't hang out with them for a while, like, see what that feels like, because we are affected by those around us. We are affected by the messages that come in. Get off of Instagram, get off of the comparing, if that's something that you do when you see other people who have more than you do. Like, you're in charge, but the good news is you're in charge and you can do this. You can affect the most beautiful changes. Like, if I could go from the person that I was way back to the person I am today, like, who I am today is like only in my wildest dreams could I have become this person. And yet here I am.
I love that. You are in charge. And because of that, you are in charge. That's great. And get rid of that noise of those people. Leisa, thank you so much. Would you go ahead? I know we mentioned your book. I'm going to show it again for people who are watching. The Mindful Millionaire. I know you have your YouTube channel. Anywhere else where people can find you?
So you can go to wealthclinic.com/vision. And I've got some meditations and the first chapter of my book and a couple other of my books that I give away. So if you want some free goodies and learn more about me, that's a great place to go.
Perfect. And I'll put those all in the show notes. So Leisa Peterson, thank you so much for joining me today on the More Than Your Age podcast.
Thank you, Erica.